He ruled Egypt for 67 years. He commanded armies of 100,000 men. He built monuments so massive they dwarf modern skyscrapers. He had over 200 wives and concubines. He fathered more than 100 children. He survived assassination attempts, deadly battles, and political conspiracies. And when he finally died at age 90, his mummified body was so perfectly preserved that 3,000 years later, scientists could still see his red hair and aquiline nose. This is Ramses II, called Ramses the Great, the most powerful pharaoh who ever sat on the throne of Egypt. He is the warrior king who fought the largest chariot battle in ancient history. He is the builder whose monuments still stand after 32 centuries. He might be the pharaoh who faced Moses in the biblical Exodus, and his story is more incredible than any Hollywood movie. This is the true tale of Egypt's ultimate warrior king, a man who became a living god and whose name still echoes through eternity. Born around 1303 BC as the son of Pharaoh Seti I and Queen Tuya, young Ramses was groomed for greatness from birth. His father was already a successful military commander and pharaoh, but he saw something special in his son. By age 10, Ramses was already being trained in warfare, chariot riding, archery, and sword fighting. At 14, his father appointed him as Prince Regent, giving him real governmental power while still a teenager. This was almost unheard of in Egyptian history. Ramses accompanied his father on military campaigns into Syria and Libya, learning battlefield strategy firsthand. He watched prisoners being executed, cities being conquered, and tribute being collected. These brutal lessons would shape him into one of history's most effective military leaders. When Seti I died in 1279 BC, Ramses was in his mid-20s, already an experienced warrior and administrator. He took the throne as Ramses II and immediately began planning something that would define his entire reign: total Egyptian dominance over the known world. But first, he had to face Egypt's greatest enemy, the Hittite Empire, in a battle that would determine the fate of the entire ancient Near East. In the fifth year of his reign, 1274 BC, Ramses led 20,000 Egyptian soldiers north into Syria. His target was the strategic city of Kadesh, controlled by the Hittite Empire under King Muwatalli II. Whoever controlled Kadesh controlled the trade routes between Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia. This wasn't just a battle, it was a war for economic supremacy. But Ramses, confident and perhaps overconfident, made a critical mistake. Hittite spies disguised as deserters told Ramses that the Hittite army was still far away, too afraid to fight. Ramses believed them. He pushed his forces forward rapidly, dividing his army into 4 divisions named after Egyptian gods: Ammonius, Ra, Ta, and Seth. The Ammonius division, led by Ramses himself, arrived at Kadesh first and began setting up camp. That's when disaster struck. The Hittite army, 50,000 soldiers and 2,500 war chariots, had been hiding behind Kadesh the entire time. They ambushed the Egyptian Ra division, slaughtering thousands of soldiers. Ramses suddenly found himself cut off, surrounded by enemy chariots, his army divided and in chaos. Most commanders would have retreated or surrendered. Ramses chose to fight. What happened next became legendary throughout the ancient world. According to Egyptian records carved on temple walls, Ramses called out to the god Ammonius for strength, then personally led a desperate counterattack. He mounted his war chariot with a shield-bearer Mena and charged directly into the Hittite army. Ancient inscriptions describe him shooting arrows with devastating accuracy, his horses trampling enemy soldiers, his personal guards fighting ferociously around him. "I found the enemy chariots scattering before my horses," Ramses later wrote. "Not one of them could fight me." Now, we must remember that Ramses himself commissioned these accounts, so there's definitely propaganda involved. But what's certain is that Ramses fought with incredible courage. The Ta division arrived just in time, crashing into the Hittite flank. The battle turned into a chaotic melee lasting hours. Thousands died on both sides. When it finally ended at sunset, neither side had achieved total victory. The Hittites controlled the battlefield but failed to destroy the Egyptian army. Ramses survived but didn't capture Kadesh. Technically, it was a stalemate. But Ramses returned to Egypt and declared it the greatest victory in history. He commissioned massive reliefs showing himself single-handedly defeating the Hittites, creating what was essentially ancient propaganda. And it worked. Egyptians believed their pharaoh was invincible. After Kadesh, Ramses realized military conquest alone wouldn't secure his legacy. He needed to build monuments so magnificent that his name would live forever. And build he did. Ramses II constructed more temples, statues, and monuments than any other pharaoh in 3,000 years of Egyptian history combined. His greatest masterpiece is Abu Simbel, carved directly into a sandstone cliff in Nubia. For colossal statues of Ramses, each 67 feet tall, sit at the entrance. Inside, the temple extends 200 feet into the mountain. Twice a year, on February 22nd and October 22nd, sunlight penetrates the entire length of the temple and illuminates statues of Ramses and the gods in the innermost sanctuary, a feat of ancient engineering and astronomy that still amazes modern scientists. He completed the massive hypostyle hall at Karnak Temple, with 134 columns, some 70 feet tall. He built the Ramesseum, his million-year mortuary temple, with a statue of himself that originally weighed over 1,000 tons. He added to Luxor Temple. He built temples in Memphis, Abydos, and throughout Nubia. Everywhere you looked in Egypt, you saw Ramses' name and face. This wasn't just ego, though ego was definitely involved. It was strategic immortality, making himself so present in stone that future generations could never forget him. But Ramses wasn't just building for glory. Every temple employed thousands of workers, farmers during flood season when they couldn't work their fields, creating a massive public works program that kept the economy strong. Temples generated wealth through agriculture and trade. They were cultural centers, hospitals, schools, and administrative hubs. Ramses understood that monumental architecture served multiple purposes: religious devotion, economic development, employment, and yes, propaganda. He also usurped older monuments, carving his name over previous pharaohs' inscriptions. This practice, called usurpation, meant that statues and temples built by earlier kings suddenly bore Ramses' cartouche. Controversial? Absolutely. Effective? Completely. Today, when tourists visit Egypt, they see Ramses everywhere because he literally put his name on everything. He even signed his building projects with a special cartouche that read, "Strong and Right," chosen of R.A., Ramses' throne name. Modern Egyptologists joke that if you find an ancient Egyptian monument without Ramses' name on it, you probably haven't looked hard enough. Ramses' personal life was as extraordinary as his public achievements. He had 8 principal wives, the most important being Nefertari, who he married as a teenager. Nefertari was likely a princess, possibly of noble birth, and Ramses adored her. He built her one of the most beautiful tombs in the Valley of the Queens, with painted walls so exquisite that modern visitors are limited to preserve them. At Abu Simbel, he did something almost unheard of. He gave Nefertari her own temple right next to his, with statues of her the same size as his own. In Egyptian art, wives were always shown smaller than pharaohs, but Ramses made Nefertari equal. He wrote love poetry about her, the one for whom the sun shines. After Nefertari died around year 24 of his reign, Ramses elevated his daughter Meretemen to the position of great royal wife. Yes, he married his own daughter, which was acceptable in royal Egyptian culture to keep bloodlines pure. He also married several Hittite princesses as part of peace treaties. But beyond his official wives, Ramses maintained a harem of over 200 concubines. The result? Over 100 children, 52 sons, and at least 60 daughters that we know of. Managing this enormous family became a logistical challenge requiring administrators just to keep track of all the princes and princesses. This massive family created both advantages and problems. Ramses had so many potential heirs that succession, should have been secure. But with so many sons, rivalry was inevitable. His first 12 sons died before him, possibly from disease, possibly from palace intrigue. His 13th son, Merneptah, finally inherited the throne when Ramses died, but Merneptah was already in his 60s, elderly by ancient standards. Many of Ramses' daughters became priestesses of Hathor or other goddesses, wielding significant religious power. Some daughters married foreign princes as diplomatic alliances. Ramses used his enormous family strategically, placing children in key positions throughout the government and priesthood, ensuring loyalty and control. His sons commanded military divisions, governed provinces, and managed temple estates. This created a bureaucratic network entirely dependent on Ramses himself. He essentially turned Egypt into a family business spanning the entire kingdom. And it worked brilliantly for 67 years, making his reign one of the most stable and prosperous in all of Egyptian history. She was a queen, a scholar, a mother, a warrior, and a fighter who deserves to be remembered not for her romantic love affairs, but for her extraordinary intelligence, remarkable courage, and fierce determination to protect her people and kingdom. Cleopatra's real secret life wasn't about romance or beauty or seduction. It was about power, political, intellectual, and personal power, and she wielded it better than almost anyone in ancient history, male or female. 2,000 years after her death, her name still echoes through time, and her true story still has the power to inspire us. In 1974, Egyptian authorities noticed Ramses' mummy was deteriorating from fungal infection. In an unprecedented move, they issued a modern Egyptian passport for Ramses II, occupation listed as king, deceased, and flew his mummy to Paris for treatment and study. When a mummy arrived at Le Bourget Airport, it received full military honors befitting a head of state. French scientists treated the fungus, performed detailed studies including X-rays and CT scans, and discovered fascinating details. They found evidence of old battle wounds, including a healed fracture in his nose and damage to his hips consistent with years of standing in a speeding chariot. His spine showed severe arthritis. His teeth were ground down to the pulp from a lifetime of eating bread contaminated with desert sand. Analysis of his hair revealed he was a natural redhead, rare in Egypt. In 1976, Ramses returned to Egypt and was placed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where millions have gazed upon the face of the man who once commanded the ancient world. Today, his mummy rests in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, still magnificent in death as he was in life. So is Ramses II truly Egypt's greatest pharaoh? The evidence is compelling. He ruled longer than almost anyone in history, 67 years. He built more monuments than any other pharaoh. He commanded Egypt's military at its peak power. He fathered over 100 children, ensuring his dynasty's continuation. He turned Egypt into the ancient world's superpower. But there's controversy too. Some Egyptologists argue he was more propagandist than warrior, that the Battle of Kadesh was actually a defeat he spun as victory, that he usurped credit for other pharaohs' achievements, that his massive building projects drained Egypt's resources. And then there's the biblical connection. Many scholars believe Ramses II was the pharaoh of the Exodus, the ruler who enslaved the Hebrews and refused Moses' demands to let my people go. While there's no archaeological proof of the Exodus, as described in the Bible, the timeline fits Ramses' reign. Some point to Merneptah's stele, erected by Ramses' son, which contains the first known Egyptian reference to Israel, as possible evidence. Whether or not he faced Moses, Ramses clearly saw himself as a god on earth, and he convinced his people to believe it too. So is Ramses II truly Egypt's greatest pharaoh? The evidence is compelling. He ruled longer than almost anyone in history, 67 years. He built more monuments than any other pharaoh. He commanded Egypt's military at its peak power. He fathered over 100 children, ensuring his dynasty's continuation. He turned Egypt into the ancient world's superpower. But there's controversy too. Some Egyptologists argue he was more propagandist than warrior, that the Battle of Kadesh was actually a defeat he spun as victory, that he usurped credit for other pharaohs' achievements, that his massive building projects drained Egypt's resources. And then there's the biblical connection. Many scholars believe Ramses II was the pharaoh of the Exodus, the ruler who enslaved the Hebrews and refused Moses' demands to let my people go. While there's no archaeological proof of the Exodus as described in the Bible, the timeline fits Ramses' reign. Some point to Merneptah's stele, erected by Ramses' son, which contains the first known Egyptian reference to Israel, as possible evidence. Whether or not he faced Moses, Ramses clearly saw himself as a god on earth, and he convinced his people to believe it too.